a fifth-generation farmer and has graciously allowed us to be here and given us a tour, and Mayor Pete Buttigieg, who you all know, who we're proud to have in our district. And just going to have a little bit of a conversation right now. And then I think we'll move the mayor on to some questions. But I think, you know, Tim, we've met before, and Tim has the honor in my world of being the first person to ever do a Zoom call from his tractor. It was awesome. Everyone brags about their background, but Tim Boring did the darn thing from his tractor, and it was rumbling along. And, you know, you've really been a pioneer in a lot of new techniques, bringing a lot of science and environmental thought into your farming. But why don't you tell us your story, particularly related to soybeans, and sort of what it's been like to be a soybean farmer with some of the instability that's gone on in the trade world. Just kind of tell the group your story.
Sure, absolutely. Well, soybeans are one of a number of crops that we've grown here historically. We're working all the time really to decrease our dependency on soybeans, in no small part due to just the uncertainty we've had around that market over the last few years specifically. It's a market here in the United States that is heavily export dependent. Upwards of a third of our soybeans are going to be exported to largely to China, other markets overseas like that. And so the instability that the Trump administration has really injected into these markets has caused a lot of consternation on the part of agriculture across America here. It's really uprooted the traditional cycles of when we might expect to be marketing those crops. Soybean prices have rallied a lot here in the last few weeks, and it's highly unusual to have a rally like this at harvest time. This is the time where you usually don't have to pay quite as much for soybeans because everybody's harvesting them and looking to get them out of the field and move them to market. But it's just been a continual aspect here over a number of years now of uncertainty about what these trade relationships with our largest trading partner, China, are going to look like. And really, for me, of down the road here, of how this influences what our greater farm economy looks like. We've been in a period of pretty depressed commodity prices for several years now. And a lot of that's fallout from 2012, when we had major droughts across significant portions of the ag production area. And it really increased a lot of not only domestic production, but international production as well. And when you increase that international supply like that, it really decreases the price on a worldwide basis for a lot of these crops. And we've been dealing with fallout from that. So when we have this kind of uncertainty that goes on now, how is that going to impact what our ag economy looks like for years down the road as well? These are long-term issues. These aren't just points in time of the fact that if soybean prices respond, we'll all be better off. These things have long economic tails to them. And I think it's specifically when you overlay some of the uncertainty about what ethanol demand looks like in the future, what weather variability and climate change is looking like on our farms, it causes a lot of questions about what ag production looks like, specifically here in Michigan, for years to come.
Yeah, and I know that as someone who also lives on a farm and leases all of our land to a soybean farmer, there's already enough instability in farming, right? What's the weather going to be? What's you know, the pricing going to be? And it's to add more instability and sort of uncertainty into that, I know has really affected a lot of our local farmers. But you brought up climate change, and I want to turn to Mayor Pete. You know, I think particularly in places like Michigan and Indiana, places in the Midwest and in the middle of the country, I sometimes feel like there's this false choice between caring about agriculture and caring about the environment, and that you somehow have to pick. There's a lot of false choices out there that I think people are asked to choose from. But can you talk about the role of climate change as it relates to farming and how maybe the Biden administration would think about handling that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, you know, one of the things that really excited me, we talked about it in my presidential campaign, and I'm really thrilled to see that the Biden-Harris team is taking this to a whole different level, is you know, we've got to talk about rural America as the solution on climate change. I think too often there's a vocabulary that tells some folks they're part of the problem, right? And the reality is we won't be able to do what this country needs to do to lead the world in climate change unless rural American agriculture specifically are helping lead the charge. You think about, we spent a lot of time in Iowa. They're very proud of Norman Borlaug, right? And the Green Revolution and all those amazing innovations that came out of, the American rural heartland and agriculture and what that meant for feeding the world. There's a chance to do the same thing, and Tim and this farm are examples of part of how that looks. But it would be nice if there were federal leadership helping make it happen, right? And when you talk about, there's a lot of language being thrown around about what our environmental policies are, but when you look at what they're actually about, when you look at where Joe Biden wants to lead us in terms of environmental leadership, a lot of it is making sure that there's a federal kind of wind at your back when you're practicing some of the things that can make a difference. You look at soil, right? Scientifically, soil is capable, just American soil and global soil is capable of removing as much carbon dioxide as the entire global transportation sector is putting in. Now, I say that scientifically, not technologically. We haven't figured out all the ways to do it. Although we know the original carbon capture technology is called plants, right? And we know how to do that. And the kind of work that Tim and a lot of farmers like him are doing around soil management, around the way that they manage their growing, and the kind of regenerative farming practices that he and others are doing, and frankly, largely doing on their initiative, right? Because there isn't the kind of set of incentives that there ought to be. That's going to be part of how we solve this. I think we got to start, when climate change comes up, a lot of times it gets talked about in a way that just makes us feel this sense of doom. I want us to feel a sense of pride when we're talking about climate because of the way that every part of America is helping us deal with it. And agriculture should absolutely be at the forefront of that. And I'm so excited for what we could do. And if you look at the Biden-Harris plan, you look at the vision and the priorities they're going to put through, they'll have to work with you in Congress in order to get it done. But they're going to meet folks like you in Congress who are way ahead of the curve, right? Speaking for communities like this and making sure it happens. And that excites me enormously because it's just one part of that vision for the future. I think we've been real caught up in politics on talking about what we're against, and we could do a whole hour on what we're up against right now. But what we're for is creating that vision, and that actually has a question I want to turn to you to talk about in terms of infrastructure too, because part of the vision for rural America that the Biden-Harris team has laid out is making sure that we have the kind of broadband connectivity that's so important for families out here. Making sure that we actually put our money where our mouth is on infrastructure, right? I'll admit, I actually thought this president might do something on infrastructure because why wouldn't you? Everybody wants it. And yet even that promise wasn't kept, right? So I think it'd be great to hear a little from you about just the kind of difference that you think it would make for you, for others like you, for this community, to have the kind of action on broadband and on infrastructure that Joe Biden wants to bring.
Absolutely. We've been really lucky here specifically that our rural electric co-op recently ran broadband down to our farm here. And it's made a world of difference. Specifically, too, as we live this quarantine world where so many of us are working from home and really relying upon this broadband access. But it's a huge issue for farms. So much of our business today is done online, from how we're accessing grain markets to pricing crops, things like that, to the technological advantages and opportunities for better understanding how crops are growing, bringing in weather modeling, understanding how your management practices impact not only your farm, but neighboring farms too, and offering some real statistical power to better understand trends and things like this. But it's simply the access for information as well. That so many of the farmers that I talk to on a regular basis about the new and different types of management practices I'm looking to implement on my farm. And to be clear, I'm doing this regenerative agriculture thing to make more money. It certainly decreases our susceptibility to weather risks, but we're dramatically cutting input use. We're getting higher yields. But the knowledge centers and the understanding of how to implement those practices, that resides among other farmers. And so it's imperative as farmers like myself and others look to implement these practices that you're well connected to the outside world, across the country, across Canada. I have conversations about this with farmers in Europe, Australia. So So being able to make those technological links across the world is absolutely important as we look to increase the management capability of our farms.
I think a lot of people aren't aware of just how sophisticated the work that you're doing has to be, right? I mean, whenever I talk to farmers, the big thing I keep hitting on is farmers are kind of doing math for a living, right? Like the modeling,
There's certainly a component of that, yeah, absolutely. Of not only understanding how to interpret soil results, understanding just what we're trying to do out here, managing inputs on a per pound basis, but really making sense of these ever-increasing data layers that you get as we move across the field with weather modeling and the capabilities we have there, understanding yield maps, understanding information we gather as we plant, overlaying all these different pieces together. It's to do a good job of this is extremely difficult, and there's a lot of math involved in this kind of stuff.
Now, you mentioned as we were walking up here, this farm's been in the family for your 6th generation, is that right?
I'm 6, yeah.
1830.
1830s, that's right.
So that's an amazing tradition that you're kind of building up here. But I know when I'm talking to folks around rural communities, there's always kind of a fear, I think, in each generation, right? That the next generation won't maybe take up the charge like that.
Well, and there's a lot of pressure as well. I mean, you don't want to be the generation that screws it up, right? But yeah, I think there's a tremendous amount of pride in all of these farms of how you stand on the shoulders of previous generations. This farm, the success of this farm has something to do with me, I'd like to think, but I'm standing on 5 previous generations that have built this into what I can have it to be today. So there's a tremendous amount of pride around those sorts of things. But in so many ways, these farms provide, touchstones and cornerstones of rural communities. Absolutely, the rural economies matter to us. How our place as it fits within the communities is really important. And as we talk about here, building back better, I think it's really important to think about too that the role the farms can play in this step, and how we just increase the opportunities for rural processing, rural handling of agricultural products, all the different aspects the food can play as a critical piece in these rural infrastructure and rural economies.
Yeah. So that makes me want to come back to Elissa, because I know whenever, just so you know, I've known Elissa Slotkin ever since she came into Congress through the community of veterans and national security folks who have such regard for her work. But whenever I talk to you, you are, I'm going to say focused rather than obsessed. But you're somewhere between focused and obsessed on the communities that you serve and what they're going through. And that includes rural communities like where we are right now. So, for farming and more broadly, just in turn, not just for the future of a farm, but for the future of a hospital or a school. We worry about things like brain drain. There's also kind of a body drain, right? Like we just don't always have the certainty that a future generation is going to be able to grow up and thrive, or as you did, leave for a little bit and then return. And I'm wondering what in your view, first of all, that you might be working on right now or have a vision to work on in the House, and then also when we had the right kind of president to help with that, what do you see as the future of making it possible for a next generation to thrive in the communities that produce them?
Well, I think the question has really changed just frankly because of COVID. And I think with COVID and all of us kind of staying nearby, we're realizing that if you have the infrastructure like broadband, you can stay in Stockbridge, Michigan and have your high-tech company here. I mean, I'll put the town square in Stockbridge against any fancy little community in California, right? It is so cute. It's got exactly what we need. And it just, for me, embodies this idea that if we invest in that infrastructure, that 21st century infrastructure, then we have the ability to attract and keep our talent here, right? And that, I think, has to be number one. Obviously, salaries matter, and we got to make sure that our economy is strong so we can pay kids as much or more than they're going to get if they go off to Chicago or they go off somewhere else. But we also have to think through how we make sure that school is affordable. I mean, we are within striking distance of two, I would say, the greatest research institutions in the country, Michigan and Michigan State. I represent Michigan State, and to be honest, if folks are worried about student debt, the choices they're going to make for that first and second job are just going to be qualitatively different if they're saddled with huge amounts of debt. They're not going to come back to Stockbridge, where they grew up, start that business, take a risk, bring their friends in. If they have got $35,000 or $40,000 of debt, they're going to go into a job that pays that off. And so there's an ecosystem here, right? It's not rocket science. It is an ecosystem. And if people can't afford education, they're not going to take risks and stay home in their home communities. And I do think, I mean, I will just say, we were talking about this on the tour, that we got very lucky during COVID that we were fighting for masks and for gloves, and we never had to walk into a supermarket and find completely empty shelves. And what would have happened to us psychologically as Americans if we had walked in and seen nothing to eat? I mean, our sense of emergency would be completely different. And so this is why I think what Tim is doing is so interesting. It's thinking strategically about our food supply as a national security issue, as a homeland security issue. It's not something for farmers only. It's not something for rural communities. If you care about protecting the country, you better care about where your food comes from and about making it here in the United States. And I think I'm supposed to end things off. Okay, I'll get off my... Woo, let me come down from that. Sure, we can clap for making things here. Thank you for taking the time, for both of you. And I know that for us, we are looking at the election in a couple of weeks as a really major in or out moment, right? It is about who we want to be as Americans. What do we want to say about our country? We also know that in places like Michigan and the rest of the Midwest, we all grew up in mixed families, right? My dad was a Republican. My mom was a Democrat. We're going to have to heal ourselves after that election. And we all have a role in that. We all have a piece in that story. It's not just for someone else. But I couldn't be more proud to represent Stockbridge, to represent Tim and his farm. And I really deeply thank Mayor Buttigieg for coming all the way out here. It really makes an impression on us when you visit our small communities. It's what we need to be doing as Democrats more and more, not less and less. And we thank you both for having us. Okay?
Thanks. It's a real treat to be here.
Thanks so much.
You light up the park. I don't care, go on and tear me apart. I don't care if you do. 'Cause in the sky full of stars, I think I saw you. You're a sky full of stars. I wanna die in your arms.
Joining today to learn more about our campaign. Rural communities are the backbone of our country, home to creative, hardworking Americans, a full 20% of our population. You feed and fuel the rest of the nation and so much of the world. But in small towns everywhere, too many of our kids and grandkids are leaving. Too often the path to the middle class feels out of reach at home. I'm running to rebuild the middle class for everyone, and that includes restoring America's promise for rural America, in rural America. As president, I promise you I'll work to bring us together, to beat today's crisis and build back better. I'll make sure we invest in rural hospitals, improve access to health care, and I'll fight persistent rural poverty, helping low-income communities tap more federal support. I'll expand broadband to every rural household, just like we did with electricity years ago, so every American can work, study, shop, run a business, and stay connected, no matter what happens or where they live. And I'll support American farmers and ranchers for real. With a trade policy that works, with loans for beginning farmers, with support for ethanol and the next generation of biofuels, with programs that help farmers boost their income using their land to offset carbon emissions. You know, there's so much we can do. This administration has bent over backwards for Wall Street. I promise you I'll fight for Main Street and everyday rural America. We're living through a time of real peril, but also of extraordinary possibilities. It's time we rise together to get everyone we know involved, to remember who we are as a nation, remind ourselves we're better than this, and to build a better future. That's what America always does. So hope you'll join us. Please go to iwillvote.com and make a plan to vote now. Where you can, go vote early if you can. Make sure everyone knows where to vote as well. All your friends. This is the United States of America. There's not a single thing we can't do, and we do it together. So let's spread the faith. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.